Now we revisit the conclusion of my interview with Professor Frank Sysyn about the Ukrainian Sich Riflemen. Today he discusses the role of women in the riflemen and the cultural initiatives associated with the riflemen.
Розмови про культуру, спонсоровані святом Дня Незалежності. The Ukrainian Sich Riflemen fought not only with rifles. They undertook cultural and educational activity to enlighten the people they had liberated. Can you tell me a little bit about that activity?
Sure. Of course, many of these people came from these educational groups, cultural groups. We can say this tremendous crescendo of national feeling produced, above all those things which most people know today, the songs of the Sich Riflemen, which are still sung. The Oi Luzi Chervona Kalina became a Ukrainian national song, and we've seen this in the restoration in Ukraine of that song. But also because they were dedicated to the documentation of their struggle, to producing a new mass consciousness. And in that they served two ways. They were the creators of culture in many cases, and they certainly were the subjects of much of culture, as I pointed out, the Stefanik stories, many that go on afterwards. And in that way, they produce a new culture for a new generation in Ukraine that is extremely important in the interwar period after the loss of the struggle in promoting the national spirit. Not only of the generation who had struggled for an independent Ukrainian state, but of those who had to live under what they saw as foreign occupation.
What was the role of women in the Sich Riflemen?
Yes, it turns out that always when we discuss these earlier periods, and as we turn towards women's history, we want to look for these topics. They turn out to be extremely important because of the formation of a women's unit. It was led by Olena Stepanyu and the women's group that's formed among the Sich Riflemen then becomes extremely important in the time of the Western Ukrainian Republic and in the Ukrainian Galician Army. She is a heroine of the war effort and persecuted for it. She is extremely important as well and is related to a number of important figures in Ukrainian culture and in Ukrainian political life. So that women's unit is very important, and indeed I think that a new album dedicated to the women in the Sich has come out recently and memorializing their role.
In what way do Ukrainian soldiers defending their country today against aggression from the East follow in the footsteps of the Sich Riflemen?
The issue, of course, is volunteer and civil society organizing itself for the defense. So in many ways, the Sich Riflemen came out of the organic work and civil society that had been conducted by the Ukrainian movement. These were, after all, within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, groups, whether they be the reading rooms or these various sporting groups, which had represented the Ukrainian cause because there were groups willing to organize themselves. And then, of course, they go to the Austrian authorities and are successful in forming a military unit under them. And those kind of civic active traditions and patriotism are what we really saw first in the Maidan itself, that is the creation of the Maidan, how the Maidan developed, how society organized itself, how it saw it was able to resist powers. And then in the next phase, which has once again been a period of Russian aggression, occupation of Ukrainian territory, attempts to establish now called the Russian world, the Ruski Mir, using once again the Russian Orthodox Church as a weapon within this, as Ukrainian society has organized. Now, of course, what we have seen is the destruction of Ukrainian patriots and Ukrainian society within those occupied zones in the far eastern parts of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast that are taken over. As I said earlier, from late 1980s on, the tradition of the Sich Riflemen, the songs have come back and become part of that tradition. So I think we can see many parallels in that. The difference, of course, now is that these groups are fighting for a Ukrainian state that exists, not for the dream to form a Ukrainian state, but in that willingness to give down their lives in some cases, and certainly to put themselves in danger, they're continuing that tradition which comes from 1914.
Thank you very much. You've given us a lot to think about.
Thank you very much.
Since Ukraine achieved its independence in 1991, Ukrainians all over the world have celebrated this anniversary with pomp and pride. Let us remember that we have this privilege and opportunity because of Ukraine's military achievements throughout history and the valor and sacrifice of its soldiers and everyday warriors, such as the warriors of Kievan Rus, the Cossacks, the Sich Riflemen we discussed here, the soldiers manning the trenches in Ukraine today, and the regular people who, through simple acts of innocent resistance, are not allowing Ukraine to fall to a relentless bully. Glory to Ukraine, Slava Ukraini. Glory to its heroes. Slava Heroyam.
Розмови про культуру, спонсоровані святом Дня Незалежності.